"I'm your daughter," she said to the famous outlaw who thought he'd lost everything worth living for the gold coins slipped through Samuel Morgan's fingers like sand through an hourglass, each piece catching the dying light of the desert sun. He sat alone in the shadow of a broken-down water tower, counting money that felt heavier than it should. $23,000. Enough to disappear forever. Enough to buy a new name, a new life, maybe even peace. But peace was a word that had forgotten how to find him. The train still smoked in the distance, a black line against the red horizon. His last job. After 20 years of running from the law, 20 years of sleeping with one eye open and his gun under his pillow, Samuel Black Sam Morgan was finally done. The weight of it all pressed down on his shoulders like stones. He looked at his hands, weathered and scarred, with dirt under the nails that never seemed to wash clean. These hands had held more guns than they had held gentle things. They had taken life and taken gold, but they had never learned to hold onto anything that mattered. The sound of hoofbeats made him look up. Dust clouds rose from the south, moving fast. Too fast. Sam tucked the gold into his saddlebags and swung up onto his horse, a gray mare named Thunder, who had carried him through more trouble than any creature should have to bear. The bounty hunters were close now. He could smell their hunger on the wind. He rode north toward a town he had heard whispers about in saloons and around campfires. Perdition, they called it. A place where broken men went to die quietly, where the law didn't bother to look too hard, and where questions were buried as deep as the bodies in the cemetery outside town. The sun burned lower as Sam rode, painting the sky the color of old blood. His shadow stretched long across the desert floor, a dark reminder of all the things he was trying to leave behind. But shadows had a way of following a man, no matter how far he ran or how fast his horse could carry him. Thunder's hooves drummed a steady rhythm against the hard-packed earth. Each step took him further from his old life, but the past clung to him like dust on his clothes. He remembered the first time he had robbed a bank, how his hands had shaken as he pointed his gun at the teller. He had been 19 then, desperate and angry at a world that had taken everything from him. Now he was 39, and the anger had settled into something colder, something that lived in his bones like winter. The town of Perdition appeared as the last light faded from the sky. It was smaller than he had expected, just a handful of buildings scattered along a single dirt road like bones left in the desert. A few windows glowed yellow with lamplight, but most of the town lay dark and still. This was a place where hope came to die, where dreams turned to dust and blew away on the evening wind. Sam tied Thunder to a post outside the saloon and stepped through the swinging doors. The inside was dim and quiet, filled with the kind of silence that comes when people have nothing left to say to each other. A few men sat at tables, nursing drinks and staring at nothing. The bartender, a heavy man with gray in his beard, looked up as Sam approached. "What'll it be, stranger?" "Whiskey," Sam said, laying a silver dollar on the bar. "The good stuff." The bartender poured the drink and slid it across the scarred wooden surface. Sam lifted the glass and let the whiskey burn down his throat, tasting like fire and forgiveness. For the first time in months, he allowed himself to think about tomorrow. Maybe he would buy a small ranch somewhere far away. Maybe he would learn to grow things instead of destroying them. Maybe he would find a way to sleep through the night without nightmares. "You running from something, mister?" the bartender asked quietly. Sam looked at him over the rim of his glass. "We're all running from something." The bartender nodded, as if he understood. In a town like Perdition, understanding came easy. Everyone here had stories they didn't tell, wounds they kept covered, and reasons for being far from wherever they had started. Sam bought a room upstairs for the night. It was small and plain, with a bed, a wash basin, and a window that looked out over the empty street. He sat on the edge of the bed and pulled off his boots, feeling the weight of the day settle into his bones. The gold sat heavy in his saddlebags, but it felt more like a burden than a blessing. He thought about the train conductor's face when he had demanded the strongbox. Fear, mostly, but something else too. Disappointment, maybe, as if the conductor had expected better from him. The thought sat strange in Sam's chest, like a stone he couldn't swallow. Outside, The wind whispered through the empty streets, carrying the scent of sage and distant rain. Sam lay back on the bed and stared at the ceiling, listening to the town breathe around him. Somewhere in the darkness, a dog barked once and went quiet. Somewhere else, a shutter creaked in the wind. These were the sounds of a place learning how to be forgotten. Sleep came slow and restless. In his dreams, Sam rode through endless desert, always running, always looking over his shoulder. The hoofbeats of his pursuers echoed like thunder, getting closer with each stride. He woke before dawn with sweat on his forehead and the taste of dust in his mouth. He dressed quietly and walked to the window. The street below was empty except for a cat picking its way carefully between the buildings. The sky was the color of old pewter, caught between night and morning. In the distance, Thunder stood patient at the hitching post, waiting like she always did. Sam counted the gold one more time, running his fingers over the coins as if they might tell him something he didn't already know. $23,000. A fortune to some. To him, it felt like the weight of every choice he had ever made, every path he had taken that led him further from the man he might have been. The morning sun crept over the horizon, painting the town in shades of gold and shadow. Sam packed his belongings and prepared to leave, but something made him pause at the window. Perdition looked different in the daylight, less like a graveyard and more like a place where people still dared to hope. But hope was dangerous for a man like him, and Sam Morgan had learned long ago that dangerous things had a way of finding him, no matter how far he ran or how well he hid. As he prepared to ride out of Perdition, he had no way of knowing that the most dangerous thing of all was already walking toward him down the dusty street, carrying secrets that would change everything he thought he knew about himself. Sam was finishing his second cup of coffee when she walked in. The morning sun was behind her, turning her into a shadow in the doorway of the saloon. He looked up from his cup, expecting to see another broken soul looking for a place to hide. Instead, he saw something that made his blood run cold. She was young, maybe 16, with dark hair that caught the light like his own had when he was her age. Her clothes were worn but clean, the kind of dress a girl might wear to church if she had a church to go to. But it was her eyes that stopped his heart. They were blue, the same shade of blue as the woman he had loved and lost 20 years ago. The girl walked across the empty saloon with careful steps, her boots making soft sounds on the wooden floor. Sam set down his coffee cup, his hand not quite steady. She stopped at his table and looked down at him with those impossible blue eyes. "Samuel Morgan?" she asked. Her voice was quiet but clear, like water running over stones. He nodded, not trusting his voice to work right. She pulled out the chair across from him and sat down. Her movements were careful, like she was afraid he might run away if she moved too fast. "My name is Emma Colby," she said. "I've been looking for you for 3 months." Sam found his voice. "I don't know any Colbys, girl." Emma reached into a small cloth bag she carried and pulled out a photograph. She placed it on the table between them, face up. Sam looked down and felt the world tilt sideways. It was Mary as he remembered her, with her soft smile and her hands folded in her lap. She was sitting in a chair, and beside her stood a man Sam didn't recognize. But in Mary's arms was a baby, wrapped in a white blanket. "My mother," Emma said softly. "Mary Colby, though I think you knew her by a different name." Sam's hand trembled as he picked up the photograph. Mary's face looked back at him across 20 years of silence. He remembered the last time he had seen her, standing in the doorway of a boarding house in Kansas, her hand resting on her belly. She had told him about the baby then, and he had ridden away that same night, telling himself he was protecting them both from the life he lived. "Mary Henderson," he whispered. Emma nodded. "She told me about you before she died. She said your real name was Samuel Morgan, but everyone called you Black Sam. She said you were the only man she ever loved." The words hit him like bullets. Sam set the photograph down carefully, as if it might break. "How did she die?" "Fever, 2 years ago. She married John Colby when I was 6 months old. He was a good man. He raised me like I was his own." Emma's voice stayed steady, but Sam could see the grief in her eyes. "But she never forgot you. She used to tell me stories about a cowboy who made her laugh and who could ride any horse ever born. Sam stared at the photograph. The baby in Mary's arms had his nose, his stubborn chin. This girl sitting across from him had his eyes when he was young, before they had turned hard and cold. "Why are you here?" he asked. "Because John Colby is dead too. Killed by rustlers last winter. Because I have nowhere else to go." Emma's voice broke just a little. "Because my mother told me that if I ever needed help, I should find Samuel Morgan. She said you were a good man who had lost his way." Sam almost laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Good man? Girl, I've robbed more trains than I can count. I've killed men for money. There's a price on my head in 6 states. I know," Emma said quietly. "I know what you've done. But I also know what my mother saw in you. And I think she saw something true." Sam looked at her across the table. She was so young, so small. Her hands were folded on the table, just like Mary's had been in the photograph. But there was strength in her, something steady and sure that reminded him of her mother. "You said you've been looking for me for 3 months. Emma nodded. "I followed you from Colorado. I lost your trail twice, but I kept asking questions. People remember Black Sam Morgan. You leave stories behind you wherever you go. And you followed those stories here." "Yes." Sam leaned back in his chair. The saloon was still empty, except for them. Outside, he could hear the morning sounds of the town waking up. A horse whinnying, a door creaking open, the sound of someone sweeping dust off a porch. "What do you want from me?" Emma looked down at her hands. "I don't know. I thought if I could find you, maybe I could understand why my mother never stopped loving you. Maybe I could understand why she named me after you. Emma. Emily Samuel Colby. She called me Emma, but my real name is Emily Samuel." The girl looked up at him. "She gave me your name, even though you were gone." The weight of it settled on Sam's chest like stones. Mary had carried his child, raised his child, loved his child, all while he was running from one trouble to another. All those years, he had told himself he was alone in the world. All those years, he had a daughter growing up without him. "I'm sorry," he said, and the words felt small and useless. Emma shook her head. "I'm not here for apologies. I'm here because I need to know who I am. John Colby was the only father I ever knew, but he's gone. My mother is gone. You're all I have left." Sam looked at her face, searching for signs of the boy he had been, the man he might have become if he had made different choices. She had his stubbornness, that was clear, and Mary's gentleness. Maybe that was enough. "I don't know how to be anyone's father," he said. "I don't know how to be anyone's daughter," Emma replied. "But maybe we can figure it out." Outside, a church bell rang the hour. The sound echoed across the empty street and died away in the desert air. Sam looked at the photograph one more time, then handed it back to Emma. She tucked it carefully into her bag. "There are men hunting me," he said. "Bad men. If they find me, anyone with me will be in danger." "I've been in danger my whole life," Emma said. "First from being poor, then from being alone. At least with you, I won't be alone." Sam studied her face. She was serious, this girl who called herself his daughter. She had followed him across 3 states, through danger and hardship, just to find him. That took courage. That took the kind of strength Mary had always had. "What happens now?" he asked. Emma smiled for the first time since she had walked into the saloon. It was Mary's smile, warm and hopeful. "I guess it's up to us." The morning light shifted through the window, painting the table between them in gold. In that light, Sam could see the future stretching out ahead of them, uncertain and dangerous, but no longer empty. For 20 years, he had been running from his past. Now, maybe it was time to learn what it meant to run towards something instead. The dust rose in the distance like smoke from a dying fire. Sam stood at the window of his room, watching 3 riders move slow across the desert toward Perdition. Even from this far away, he knew what they were. Bounty hunters had a certain way of sitting their horses, a certain hunger in how they moved across the land. Emma sat on the edge of the bed behind him, her hands folded in her lap. She had been quiet since they left the saloon, letting the weight of their meeting settle between them like dust after a storm. Now she watched him watching the riders, and Sam could feel her questions hanging in the air. "How long before they get here?" she asked. "An hour, maybe 2. Sam let the curtain fall back across the window. "They're not in any hurry. They think they have me cornered." Emma stood up and walked to the window. She was taller than he had first thought, almost as tall as Mary had been. Do they? Sam considered the question. 2 days ago, you would have said no. 2 days ago, he would have been on Thunder and riding hard before those riders got within 10 miles of town. But that was before Emma walked into his life, carrying Mary's photograph and 20 years of questions he didn't know how to answer. Maybe, he said. Emma turned away from the window. You're thinking about staying because of me. It wasn't a question, so Sam didn't treat it like one. He sat down in the room's only chair, a wooden thing with a broken arm that creaked under his weight. Tell me about your mother's last days. Emma looked surprised by the change of subject, but she sat back down on the bed. She got sick in the spring. Started with a cough that wouldn't go away. John took her to the doctor in town, but there wasn't much he could do. The fever came later. Sam closed his eyes. He could picture Mary in a sickbed, her face pale but still beautiful. Was she in pain? Not at the end. She just got very quiet, like she was listening to something far away. Emma's voice grew soft. She talked about you more in those last few weeks than she had in years. She said she wondered if you ever thought about her. The words cut deep. Sam had thought about Mary almost every day for 20 years. In quiet moments between jobs, in the long nights when sleep wouldn't come, in the empty spaces where love might have lived if he had been a different kind of man. Every day, he said quietly. Emma looked at him with those blue eyes that were so much like her mother's. Why didn't you come back? Sam stood up and walked to the wash basin. He poured water from the pitcher and splashed it on his face, buying himself time to think. The water was warm and tasted of dust. Because I was a coward. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I have. Sam dried his face with a rough towel. I told myself I was protecting you both. Told myself you were better off without me. But the truth is, I was scared of what I might become if I tried to be a father and failed. Emma was quiet for a long moment. Outside, the sound of hoofbeats grew closer. Sam counted them in his head, measuring the time they had left. Are you hungry? He asked. The question seemed to catch Emma off guard. She blinked and nodded. I haven't eaten since yesterday. Sam reached for his hat. Come on, let's get you some food. They walked down to the saloon together. The bartender, who Sam had learned was named Pete, was wiping down glasses behind the bar. A few other patrons sat scattered around the room, nursing drinks and keeping to themselves. Sam chose a table in the back corner where he could watch the door. What's good here? Emma asked, looking around the dim room. Nothing, Pete called from behind the bar. But the stew won't kill you, and the bread's only a day old. Emma smiled, the first real smile Sam had seen from her. Stew sounds perfect. Pete brought them 2 bowls of beef stew and a loaf of dark bread. The stew was thin and the meat was tough, but Emma ate like she hadn't seen food in weeks. Sam watched her, remembering how Mary used to eat with the same careful attention, like every bite was a gift. Tell me about John Colby, Sam said. Emma tore off a piece of bread and dipped it in her stew. He was a good man. Quiet but good. He had a ranch about 50 miles south of Denver. Raised cattle mostly, a few horses. He never made me feel like I wasn't his real daughter. But you knew. I always knew. I looked nothing like him, and he never tried to pretend I did. But he loved my mother, and that was enough for him to love me too. Sam felt a stab of something that might have been jealousy. This man, this stranger, had been there for Emma's first steps, her first words, all the things a father should have been there for. John Colby had been the man Sam was too afraid to be. How'd he die? Emma's spoon stopped halfway to her mouth. She set it down carefully. Rustlers came in the winter. They wanted the horses. John tried to stop them. She shrugged, but Sam could see the pain in her eyes. They shot him in the yard. I found him when I came back from town. The words hung in the air between them like smoke. Sam reached across the table and covered her hand with his. Her fingers were small and cold under his palm. I'm sorry. Emma looked down at their hands. He taught me to shoot. Said every woman should know how to protect herself. I think he knew something like this might happen. Are you any good? Good enough. Emma pulled her hand free and went back to eating. I put 2 bullets in one of the rustlers before they rode off. Sam studied her face. There was steel under the softness, strength that reminded him of Mary, but with an edge that was all her own. This girl had survived things that would have broken other people. She was tougher than she looked. The sound of hoofbeats stopped outside. Sam heard voices, low and careful. Spurs jingled on the wooden walkway. Emma's eyes went wide, but she didn't move. "Stay calm," Sam whispered. "Keep eating." The saloon doors swung open. 3 men walked in, their clothes dusty from travel, their hands resting easy on their guns. The leader was tall and lean, with a scar running from his left ear to the corner of his mouth. Sam recognized him from one of the posters. Jack Morrison, bounty hunter. Mean as a snake and twice as fast. Morrison's eyes swept the room and settled on Sam. A slow smile spread across his scarred face. Well, Morrison said, his voice carrying across the silent room. "Black Sam Morgan, you're a hard man to find." Sam took a sip of his coffee and set the cup down carefully. "Jack Morrison, I heard you were still breathing." "Too bad." Morrison laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Still got that sense of humor, Sam. That's good. You're going to need it where you're going." Emma sat perfectly still, her spoon frozen in her hand. Sam could feel the tension radiating off her like heat from fire. "I'm not going anywhere, Jack." "Oh, but you are. There's $5,000 on your head, dead or alive." "I prefer alive, but I'm not particular." Morrison's eyes shifted to Emma, taking in her youth, her obvious fear. His smile widened. "And who's this pretty little thing? Don't tell me Black Sam Morgan's gone soft in his old age." Sam's hand moved slowly toward his gun. "Leave the girl out of this." "Can't do that, Sam. She's seen us now. Can't have witnesses running around." Morrison's hand tightened on his gun grip. "Of course, if she's special to you. That makes this even more interesting." Emma found her voice. "I'm nobody special, mister. Just passing through." Morrison studied her face, and Sam could see him putting pieces together. The girl's age, her resemblance to Sam, the way Sam's whole body had gone tense when Morrison looked at her. "Nobody special," Morrison repeated slowly. "Now that's interesting, because Black Sam Morgan don't usually sit down to eat with nobody special." The room held its breath. In the silence, Sam could hear his own heartbeat, could feel the weight of his gun against his hip. 20 years of running had brought him to this moment, this choice between the man he had always been and the man he might still become. But as he looked at Emma, sitting across from him, still holding her spoon like it might save her life, Sam realized the choice had already been made. Some things were worth fighting for, even if you didn't deserve them. The silence that followed gunfire was different from any other kind of quiet Sam Morgan had ever known. It wasn't the peaceful hush of dawn breaking over empty plains, or the expectant stillness before storm. This silence carried weight, the heavy, settling dust of decisions that couldn't be undone, of words that hung in the air like smoke from spent cartridges. Sam stood in the middle of what had once been Millfield's main street, his Colt still warm in his hand. The bodies of 3 men lay scattered around him like discarded playing cards, their blood already beginning to darken in the desert sand. Above him, the sun burned merciless and bright, casting his shadow long and thin across the ground where Jimmy Morrison's gang would never threaten anyone again. But it wasn't the dead men that held his attention now. It was the young woman standing 20 paces away, her blue dress dusty and torn, her dark hair falling loose from its pins. Emma, his daughter. The word still felt strange in his mouth, foreign as a language he'd never learned to speak. She hadn't moved during the shooting, hadn't screamed or run or even flinched when the bullets started flying. She'd stood there watching him with those eyes, Sarah's eyes, as if she'd been waiting her whole life to see what kind of man her father really was. Now she knew. Now they both knew. The wind picked up, stirring the dust around their feet and carrying with it the smell of gunpowder and blood and something else, something that might have been hope, if Sam remembered what hope smelled like. "Is it over?" Emma's voice was steady, stronger than it had any right to be. She was barely 19, but there was something in the way she stood, the set of her shoulders, that reminded Sam of her mother. Sarah had faced down trouble the same way, chin up and eyes clear, as if fear was just another luxury she couldn't afford. Sam holstered his gun slowly, his hands suddenly feeling older than his 43 years. "It's over," he said, though he wasn't sure what it meant anymore. The gunfight, certainly. Morrison's pursuit of them across 3 states. But other things, bigger things, felt like they were just beginning. He looked down at his hands, at the calluses and scars that told the story of a life lived hard and fast. These hands had killed 12 men now, had stolen enough gold to buy a small ranch, had held Sarah's fingers the night Emma was born. But they'd never learned to braid a little girl's hair or help with schoolwork or any of the 1,000 small tendernesses that made a father. "You came back for me," Emma said, and there was something like wonder in her voice. She took a step toward him, then another, and Sam felt something crack open in his chest, something that had been sealed shut for so long he'd forgotten it was there. "Morrison had you." The words came out rougher than Sam intended. "Couldn't let that stand. But you could have run. You could have taken his offer and ridden away. That's what outlaws do, isn't it?" Sam looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not just Sarah's eyes, but Sarah's stubborn tilt of the head, her way of asking questions that cut straight to the bone. "Maybe that's what I used to be," he said quietly. "Don't know what I am now." Emma reached in her dress pocket and pulled out something that made Sam's breath catch in his throat. It was a photograph, old and creased, of him and Sarah taken in some long-ago town whose name he couldn't even remember. They looked young in it, impossibly young, and happy in a way that seemed like something from another man's life. "She kept it," Emma said, holding the picture between them like a bridge across 18 years of silence. "All this time, she kept it. Even after you left. Even after everyone said you were dead." She said, Emma's voice caught, and she had to swallow hard before continuing. "She said you were a good man who'd gotten lost. She said good men could find their way home if they wanted it badly enough." The photograph trembled in Emma's hands, or maybe it was his own hands shaking as he reached out to touch it. Sarah's face looked back at him from the faded paper, and with it came a flood of memories he'd spent years trying to forget. The way she laughed at his terrible jokes. The way she'd sing while cooking breakfast. The weight of her head on his shoulder during cold nights when the world felt bigger than 2 people could possibly handle alone. "I wasn't good to her," Sam said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Wasn't good to you?" "No," Emma agreed, and the simple honesty of it hit him harder than any bullet ever had. "But you're here now." Sam looked around at the empty street, at the dead men who'd never harm anyone again, at the dust that would cover their bones, and the bones of everyone else who'd ever made the mistake of thinking violence was the answer to life's questions. He'd been running for 18 years, from the law, from his past, from the memory of the woman he'd loved and the child he'd abandoned. But standing here with Emma, with Sarah's eyes looking at him from his daughter's face, he realized he'd been running from the wrong thing. The real enemy wasn't the law, or other outlaws, or even his own reputation. It was time. Time that slipped away like water through cupped hands. Time that couldn't be bought back with gold or won back at gunpoint. Time that he'd wasted being Sam Morgan the outlaw instead of Sam Morgan the father. "I don't know how to be what you need," he said finally, and it was perhaps the most honest thing he'd said in 20 years. Emma stepped closer, close enough that he could see the flecks of gold in her brown eyes, close enough that he could smell the desert sage in her hair. "Maybe we could learn together," she said. The sun was beginning its long slide toward the western horizon, painting the desert in shades of amber and rust. Somewhere in the distance, a hawk cried out, its voice echoing across the vast emptiness that stretched in every direction. It was the kind of country that could swallow a man whole, could make him disappear so completely that even his own name became just another story told around campfires. But standing there with his daughter, Sam Morgan felt something he hadn't experienced in 18 years of running and hiding and shooting his way out of trouble. He felt like he might finally be ready to stop moving long enough to see where he'd ended up. The photograph in Emma's hands caught the dying light, and for just a moment, the 3 of them were together again. Father, mother, and daughter, suspended in time like dust motes in a sunbeam, fragile and precious and somehow, against all odds, still holding together after all these years. Tomorrow would bring new decisions, new roads to choose between, new ways to get lost or find their way home.